part of the Esther Guide's New Year's Eve event, I interviewed occultist Nineveh Shadrach about his views on 2023. Nineveh is an esoteric author, teacher, initiator, and founder of the Magical Society of the White Flame. He is an expert in Islamic magic and the Jinn, with many contacts with the Watchers and other powerful inner contacts that give him his insights. He's written a number of books, including The Book of Deadly Names, 72 Evil Jinn Images, The Secrets of Ancient Magic, Path of the Goddess, Occult Encyclopedia of Magic Squares, and Love, Healing, Prosperity Through Occult Powers. And of course, his primary work is Magic That Works, Practical Training for the Children of Light. And without further ado, here is our interview. We talked last year a little bit about 2022. So wanted to get your ideas. What do you see as an occultist? What is 2023 going to look like for most people?
Well, it hasn't been looking any better since 2020. We've been going through a nonstop cycle of one crisis mode after another crisis mode. I don't really think 2023 is going to see a reversal of the trend. I think more or less the situation is going to get worse for a lot of people economically. I think it's going to get worse as far as security is concerned. I try to be optimistic, but everything seems to be heading toward, I guess it also depends on where you are and who you are. And if you're some guy in Africa and Nigeria, you're probably not noticing any difference or change. But if you're living somewhere in Europe, you're definitely gonna experience economical and possibly military turmoil in the coming couple of years. So again, it all depends on where you are. I don't really think you can create a kind of planetary-wide prediction. I think it all really affects different people depending on where they're at and what kind of security they have set up to go. But I don't think the international economical outlook is going to improve in 2023.
And what are the underlying, would you say, the occult reasons for this are?
Well, when it comes to this, I have a different perspective than the majority of the people in the world, and that stems from not any kind of an insight into some secret information that they don't have. It's more because of my previous encounters. So I've learned that there's three forces that are basically on this planet in play at any one time. The first and the most obvious, of course, is the human facet, and that's pretty much what we get in our news, what we get in our media. That's what we're always seeing. And I think from there we can see basically the typical conflict between global powers as they vie for military dominance or resources. And that's just never going to change. We're always going to be seeing some kind of political play between the various powers with winners and losers, especially with the emergence of countries like China. So that's going to be a threat to the Western dominance. So there's going to be some kind of play there that's going to happen. But unfortunately, I don't think the human factor or element is the only one at play. Obviously, I write about Jinn magic, and I don't write about Jinn magic from the perspective of spirits that are part of your subconscious mind. I write about them from the perspective that they are physical entities with physical abilities and physical power and their own military and political agenda. That's something we don't know. When we talk about the secrets of the Jinn, most often people think the secrets of the Jinn are magical grimoires or evocation or names or how to summon one. But really the secrets of the Jinn is socio-political or military interest. And that's something you never see released anywhere. Because for the majority of the people in the world, their encounter with the Jinn as occultists is on a subjective level, right? But when you encounter a Jinn that can, alter the engine of engine of an airplane mid-flight, right? And you witness it control and manipulate the aircraft at will. When you witness it do things like teleportation of objects and people, then it changes the dynamic from dealing with something that is part of your subconscious mind to something objective. So now, how does the jinn interact with human societal functions is another question. And I don't really know if I have a complete answer to it, but that would be one thing that would factor in, right? So again, it really boils down to what's going on in the jinn world, right? And that's something we as humans don't always have access to or privy to, even as occultists or magicians. Okay, I'll give you a simple example. I have a guy who bought from me a jinn ring, and he used a jinn ring to make contact with a jinn. And that jinn is like contacting and assisting him in different things in his life and things like that. But he mentioned something, that jinn, about some kind of a military movement or troop movement that was occurring among the jinn themselves. And the guy wanted to inquire more about it, and the jinn said, no, we're not going to give you access to this information. You're not allowed to have access to this information. I'm just giving you a tip off in case you start seeing it manifesting in the world around you, how it's going to impact your country. Now, he's in Europe, by the way. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And it kind of gave him a hint that there's going to be a war in Europe, right? That was before the European War. And the guy got curious. So he tried to summon another jinn to inquire and get answers about this military event that's going to have impact in Europe. And the ring on his hand literally exploded, shattered into little pieces while he was wearing it. He didn't hit it in anything, it just exploded.
So you're saying that maybe some of the external events are actually happening first in the jinn world.
Well, I'm saying that there's a direct interlock. For example, if let's say, were to have a nuclear war, and the nuclear missiles were to be fired between Russia and the United States, we already know the impact of that can be in the human civilization. But nuclear bombs produce radiation. And that radiation from the nuclear bomb would have impact on the jinn world. So will the jinn allow these nuclear missiles to be fired? That can hurt them, right? We may not see them directly in the sense of military movements from the news. Whenever a missile is fired, or when this human troop movement is moved along, we see that very clearly on the news. But it only takes one jinn to affect global events. Only one, right? Because all he has to do is affect one person. He doesn't have to affect the entire US military. He has to affect Biden. He doesn't have to affect the entire Russian military. He only has to affect Putin.
What do you assess the jinn intentions? Are they benevolent or malevolent?
I think for the most part, status quo pretty much fits the bill of what they're looking for. But jinn are not only one group. So we think of them as monolithic, okay, the jinn. But they are also individuals of their own agendas. So somebody like, for example, if we take a look in the Quran it refers to Satan, right? Shaitan. And a lot of people have since personified Shaitan and Iblis as some kind of demonic figure who sits there seeking out to destroy human souls and corrupt human, and get women laid, naked and laid, and get guys to do drugs. And we have this morality issue around it. But if we take a look at the original origin of the word Shaitan, it's a military opponent. It's not a moral opponent. It's not also an entity per se. It's actually a reference to a military opponent. So when Russia invades Ukraine, Russia is Ukraine's Shaitan, is Ukraine's Satan, because this is military opponent, right? When United States invaded Iraq, again, United States became Iraq's shaitan, Satan. So that's what they call it, Great Satan. But I mean, that's political there from their perspective, but technically correct. It's technically correct because it's military opponent. So everyone's, or anyone who's a military opponent set on starting a conflict is a shaitan or Satan. So having said this, okay, we know from the Quran that certain jinn are humans' military opponents. That's why the Quran makes references and says, "Oh, humankind, don't take the shayateen, as anything but enemies, because they are your enemy, your opponent." They're not talking about it from the perspective of morality or ethics. They're talking about a military process. So not all jinn, of course, are shayateen. So not all jinn are military opponents. So it really depends on what you're dealing with and what's going on. So, for example, again, to kind of make this a little complicated, Satan or Iblis might be actually a friend to Latvia. He might like what's going on in Latvia, and therefore he's a friend to Latvia. But he may not like what's going on in the government under Saddam Hussein, so he will instigate the conflict and the war in Iraq to kill Saddam Hussein. That would make him Saddam Hussein Satan, right? I'm talking just kind of like generic examples, obviously. We don't really know for a fact what's going on. So I think ultimately, the jinn's interests are primarily themselves, not us, right? So when it suits their purpose, they're friends. When it suits their purpose again, they're enemies. I don't think it's universal in the sense of saying, they're malevolent or benevolent. I think it really depends on interest. Like any geopolitical government or state, they function on the concept of interest. What's their interest?
Now, in Islamic eschatology, they talk about a malhama, a great war.
Right.
Do you see that happening anytime soon?
Well, I don't really like to make predictions when it comes to end time events, because I feel that can pretty much be either a self-fulfilling prophecy or just simply a shot in the dark when people talk about it, right? Is this going to be the end of the world? Is this going to be this? Is that going to be that? But if from an Islamic perspective, the prophecies connected to the Malhama, the Great War, had a precursor list of events that were to transpire first. So we have sequences. It wasn't just, we're going to have the Great War. It was before the Great War starts, we're going to see this, we're going to see this, we're going to see that. And when you take a look at the list of events or occurrences, whether human advancements, social change, political conflicts, they're not generic. They were listed very specifically, right? Very specifically. Including, for example, references to when the Imam Mahdi is talking, people will see his on their hands. Well, that made no sense 2,000 years ago. Now we have iPhone. So now when he's talking, you're going to see him you see his face on your hands. That means he's going to be using modern technology to communicate using a device like a phone, right? But they had no concept of phones 2,000 years ago. They talked about the war in Iraq. They talked about a whole number of events that have all transpired. So based on the accuracy rate of the Islamic prophetic renditions, I would say that the Great War is probably around the corner. But I'm not going to be, yelling that the sky is falling, we're all going to die, because I'm only basing this on the success ratio or track record of the Islamic writing.
Now, for the people who may not know Islamic eschatology, how would you describe the Malhama?
Well, the Malhama is not really a human event. If you pay close attention to the literature on the Malhama, there are many indicators that this is a three-tier conflict. You have the angels conflict, they're involved. You have the Jinn conflict, they're involved, and the human conflict. So it's three militaries engaging in one battle at once, right? And again, when we think of angels, we have this religious modern thinking that, you know, the winged characters, the cherub, the spiritual kind of concepts that we have. But, and I had the fortune or misfortune, depending on how you look at it, of having encountered one physically. And I don't want to go into a lot of details on it, but I can tell you that my physical encounter, this is physical. We're not talking a magical evocation when you see a scrying mirror, right? This is more akin like a UFO abduction, you know, type thing that people talk about. You're encountering something that just kind of came into your house and invited on a physical level, something that you can record on camera. If we had an iPhone back then, I could have flipped in the iPhone, I could have recorded everything. And I've seen the video. It's nothing that could not be physically captured on modern recording devices. So I think when we're talking about angels, we really are talking about a race of beings who are also like us, independent creation. I think we've made the mistake of assuming that jinn and angels are, again, part of some metaphoric spiritual reality. They're not. They're part of the physical world. And just because we haven't encountered them in the physical sense with the majority of people on the planet, it doesn't mean that they are not physical. Prophet Muhammad's encounters in the, you know, in the cave was with a physical entity, right? He talked about revelations into his heart descending in the sense of inspirations that were put into his heart by a higher power, right? But whenever he talked about angelic contact, he was dealing always with something physically tangible, somebody you could see. You know, when men walked into and sat around and talked to us, to his Sahaba, and then they laughed and they said, "Who are these guys?" "Oh, these are angels." So they were referring to physical entities, physical beings, not some spiritual metaphoric, conception that we have in modern media, right? Winged cherubs and stuff like that. We're dealing with a race of beings. So we know already that the jinn are a race of beings, the angels are a race of beings, the humans are a race of beings. So they're all here at different capacity. The majority of what inhabits the planet are humans. The other group is the jinn, which is another group, and I think they also extend outside just the physical planet here. And then we have the angels. And if you can think of angels as physical entities or physical beings, it would explain why for the majority of people who are actually praying or calling on angels, they don't really get responses because the entity isn't here. It's not a physical entity. It's not omnipresent, omnipotent. It doesn't know when you're calling it in your room. So that's not taking away from the subjective experience of angels when you're doing something like scrying or you're doing something like meditation. But we're talking about the objective side, right? I hope I'm making sense here.
Yeah. Interesting. Nineveh, what do you think of the United States? What is your sort of prediction for 2023?
As a country?
Just in general, of events in the United States.
Yeah, I think the United States trajectory is going to continue to be the same. I don't see any drastic reversal. Political divisions are still there between Democrats and Republicans, and those divisions are being played up by the media and it's being played up by the government. It's simple basics of divide and conquer to kind of garnish votes and things like that for their parties. I think the social issues, economical issues, all those kind of decline, going to continue, but they're not unique in that sense. I mean, like I said, it's affecting the world in general. I think people tend to see, United States as a kind of unique power, but it's a country like every other country out there. It goes through its process, its conception, its birth, its growth, which is the point of strength, and then a point of decline, and then something else emerge. Look at all the empires in human history. We have many nations that emerged and then they just declined. And I think that's a normal part of the process. I think the Americans will be fine as a people, assuming, of course, they don't enter into a nuclear war with Russia. And then it's really bad.
What do you see as some of the occult current moving events in the United States?
What are you referring to?
Like in other words, do you see anything spiritual, Jinn activity there particularly?
Well, the Jinn are having their own conflict at the moment, so it's unpredictable what their plans are, and I worry about Jinn conflicts because whenever the Jinn are having a conflict, humans end up dying en masse. It's a kind of they don't end up killing the humans directly, but it end up being a kind of a side effect of whatever there's a conflict. So I don't really know where it's. I mean, I can tell you off record, but I don't know if I feel comfortable putting it on record.
Yeah, no problem. What is this Jinn conflict over?
I think it's like all conflict. It's about territory. It's about power and control and territory. I think what we're seeing here is, which I think is what it can end up probably sparking the Great Malhama, is there is if you take a look at the history of the Jinn, according to legends, this is, obviously whenever you're dealing with something like the Jinn, you cannot back it scientifically. You are dealing with myth and legends and stories. But according to legends and myth and stories, historically speaking, the current empire of the Jinn that we have residing on Earth today is a result of the war by the angels themselves on precursors on them directly, and possibly on precursor civilizations. If you take a look in the Quran, you'll see a reference in Surah Jinn, I think, where there's a reference to this army that appeared in the sky, and then the Jinn were like, we don't know what the army intends for the earth, good or bad. And they've got this information after building listening posts or listening stations in the heavens. Now, if we're looking at this from a religious perspective, the heavens, again, is some kind of spiritual dimension you go to when you're dead. You die, you go to heaven. But if you're looking from a physical perspective, heaven is outer space. So listening posts will be listening posts in outer space. We have listening posts ourselves. We call them, satellites. We have radio telescopes. We have all kinds of things built in outer space to catch signals. So the Jinn have had their own devices, and then they captured this invading army that showed up. And then they wondered what it hosts for the earth is future, good or bad. Okay. Now, I don't think the Jinn were on earth at the time. Because then, according to the legends, we had this conflict between this invading army from the sky, the heavens, and the Jinn themselves. And at the end of this conflict, we have some Jinn who aided the invading army. And one of those Jinn aiding the invading army went in and said, give me earth afterward, so to speak. And then that's when God or the invading army decided to create mankind and place mankind on the earth, and the whole story of the fall emerged, and we descended down from the Garden of Eden upon the earth, again descending implying that we're going from above down to earth. And that this invading, but who was this figure, right? This figure was nothing, nobody, this figure was basically Iblis. So Iblis became the figure who was an enemy, military enemy of mankind, right? Became our Satan, a military enemy. But he also resided here upon the earth with us. But what happened to the Jinn that were killed in the war? Not all of them died. According to, again, legends, some of them moved on to other locations, either desolate islands or top of mountains, or they crossed over to this place that they call Kaf, which is like a Shambhala, mystical place, this weird location that cannot be really traced. And they went there, right? And then Kaf kind of becomes a bit of a important symbol for religious astrology, because it's in Kaf that near Kaf, or the borders of Kaf, is the whole idea of Gog and Magog residing, who will emerge at the end of time. The Sufis talk about Kaf opening up, and then an army of saints, an army of Jinn will descend from Kaf, and then they will, wage war upon the evildoers on the earth. So we have this reference to Kaf as being a place of saints, a place of elevated entities and beings, but also plays a role in end-time viewpoints that exist in Islamic belief system, especially among the Sufis. So, I think the war is between the Jinn, who were from the old world, and the current one residing here on Earth. The leftovers.
You're saying the jinns who were living on Mount Kaf, correct?
Yeah, Mount Kaf, or the Jinn who were exiled after the war on Earth, are basically interested in reclaiming their church back. So we're gonna see some kind of activity going between the two sides. That's my guess.
Yeah, interesting. What is your view on UFO phenomena? I know we're seeing an increase lately. Is that connected to the Jinn, or is that something else?
I'm kind of iffy on this because I don't think the UFO are Jinn. I think we can rule them out as being Jinn. But what are they? It's a bit of a quandary. And the reason I say this is because I've had an on UFO encounter years back, and it left me with more questions than answers. I've gone from dismissing the UFO phenomena completely to trying to make sense of it. And the reason I say that is because if you're dealing with an alien residing in a ship, traveling, an organic entity sitting on a ship, pressing buttons and levers and stuff, then you will not be able to sense that entity until it's right there. And it will be limited by complete restrictions on all bioorganic, life forms, regardless, based on the technology, of course, gives them an edge. But when I encountered the UFOs, I knew they were coming before they showed up. And I ran to my house, actually in fear. And I locked up all the windows and the walls. But I didn't know the UFOs were showing up. Like, I didn't know that it would be a UFO. I just felt a power, a threatening power was appeared. And I felt very unsafe. And I was in a very tiny town, so where nothing happens except for a bear. So it was like, there was no reason for this panic attack to have emerged and the sense of being hunted by something malefic and evil. And it was something that would physically be able to go into the house. So I was locking doors, locking windows, and my partner at the time was kind of curious, what am I doing? Because she's never seen me act that way before, ever. And then 30 minutes later, we had 7 UFOs over my house.
Wow.
Right? And they definitely did not feel like Jinn. They felt like they had a spiritual ability or a spiritual presence to them. It was they are so I would waver more toward them being, more within the angelic dimension, if they are anything, than they would be Jinn. Right? Because they're beings of light. Most UFOs are sources of light. And we've seen them referenced that way before in religious literature, right? Even the Hayat HaKadosh in the Jewish literature, the spinning wheels, the Merkabah, all of that stuff. It's very evident that people were seeing some kind of discs of light that was in the sky, made of pure light. So that would be my guess, if there's anything. The other possibility is that they are a precursor race. The Jews have implied that there is a precursor race to humans in the solar system. Before the Jinn showed up, before the humans showed up, before the invading army showed up, there was another civilization in here. Not necessarily on Earth particularly, but there was another civilization in the solar system. So it's speculative that some of these physical UFOs may have been technology from this precursor civilization, which means they didn't have to travel from, another star system. They're already here, always been here.
Yeah, very interesting, because I know we're seeing more and more evidence of their interactions now. So, but it's, yeah. So we'll see with that. Yeah. So you see, it's not it's more of a benevolent force then.
The UFOs, the ones I encountered were malevolent. They were not benevolent.
I see.
Malevolent. I never got any benevolent vibe from them. They scared the hell out of me. So, but again, like I said, because we are dealing with a lot of hypotheticals, none of us really sat inside a UFO and checked it, right? Most of the people writing on the subject are doing so from an outsider perspective and kind of giving their opinions. Which is why I try not to talk a lot about the subjects, because I feel like I'm not really an expert. I can only talk about my personal experiences, right? And that's not necessarily sufficient enough to go with. But I don't believe, at least from my experience, that they were dealing with something from another star system. I think those guys are here.
Yeah, fascinating. Now, tell us a little bit about what your plans are in 2023. You're offering a number of courses, and you have a school. So maybe you could tell a little bit about to the listeners about your what you're offering in the next year.
Well, my focus for the next year is going to be on the construction of the Magic Tower. That is the biggest project on my plate, really. Obviously, I will still be translating books and manuscripts on the Jinn and teaching stuff on astrology and other esoteric aspects. But my focus is really the tower, because I believe the tower has an impact on the future of human history.
Could you explain a little bit about the tower?
The tower is actually a kind of an alien project, like it's Jinn project, Angels project. Its purpose is kind of evolving. It started in 4000 BC, where it was built. And after it was built, the guy who built it disappeared. And with his disappearance, the watchers or the angels or the entities that were there also left. And one of the things that were spotted with their departure was the change in human lifespan. Humans back then were living for hundreds or thousands of years, according to records. But after those entities left, human lifespan shrunk. Okay. And hence the story of figures like Gilgamesh going out and trying to discover the secret of immortality and get it back, because whatever technology they possessed or secret they possessed was gone. And the remnants of that tower still reside somewhere in Iraq. It's still there. It's gone in obscurity. But whatever that tower project was 4,000 to 5,000 years ago wasn't just a human construction. It had played a very important role in non-human events that were transpiring. So now there's a desire to reconstruct it again. And the tower doesn't just serve as, a nice building where we're just going to go in there and do magic. It's meant to be some kind of a portal mechanism that the Jinn are going to use to build a bridge.
And where is this tower located now?
Well, we don't have it yet. I bought property in the Philippines on an island, which happens to be very much near where the Chinese conflict over disputed islands are. In an area that has historically been linked to land of Ophir in the Bible, according to some writers.
What was that? The land of what?
Ophir. O-P-H-I-R. Where King Solomon acquired his stuff for his temple.
Wow.
Sent his ships and stuff. There's even some legend King Solomon married a local woman from this area as well. So who knows? I mean, again, these are all legends and histories. But so the point of the tower is the construction. I will give you a bit of a generic idea. Now, the watchers, which I don't mean by them fallen angels, but generally all angels are watchers. The watchers gave us the shield of the Magi symbol, which, as you know, is a very powerful symbol of protection against negative forces, especially evil Jinn, which also occurs or which also happens to represent something that occurs with the sun, oddly enough. So the shield of the Magi as a protection symbol will be constructed in 3D across the 1 hectare of land. Now, I've experimented with this shield in the sense of protection. It's very effective. But if you step in the center of the shield, or you put your forehead in the middle of the shield, or you'll see that it's generating a lot of power in the center of it. For a symbol, it's just organically generating a lot of power. You need to charge it or anything. By itself, it's charging. It's producing that effect using geometric, design, I guess, mathematics. So in the center of that shield, we will build in the tower, which is a 7-leveled ziggurat. Sumerian ziggurat. And outside the shield, there are going to be 360 statues of Jinn. Each one of the statues will be charged by a talisman connecting it to one of the Jinn. So there will be 360 statues, living talismanic statues around the shield as protectors and guardians. And then you have the shield, which will be a physical building, not a two-dimensional, but a physical building. You can walk inside it. And in the center of that is going to be the 7th-floor ziggurat. And on top of the ziggurat, there's going to be the portal. That's the plan.
Wow, that sounds very intense, very amazing project. When do you think it'll be finished?
Well, it's all about money at the moment.
Yeah, fascinating.
Whenever there's enough funds for it, I guess.
Wonderful. If someone does want to study with you, how's the best way to contact you?
And they can just find me on Facebook.
Facebook. Great. Yeah, you have some amazing courses, on dealing with Jinn invocation. I've taken some of them myself, so it's highly recommend Nineveh's teachings. Great. Well, thank you very much. This has been a great interview. Really appreciate your time.
Following our interview, Nineveh wrote me that there was something he neglected to mention in the interview. He mentioned his technique of opening a Magus gate that is in his book, Magic That Works. Now, in this book, which I would highly recommend, he teaches you how to open this gate. So it's almost like a portal to the past and the future. So he was saying that you can tell the future, you can open a Magus gate, for instance, in London right now, as it stands, and record any experiences, vibes, energy you're getting from it. Then open the Magus gate to London in 2024, for example, and if you get nothing but crickets or weird negative vibes, then odds are that London doesn't exist in 2024. You can do the same for various cities around the world, the big ones, and keep pushing it 1 year into the future. The year where most or almost the majority of world cities give you crickets or negative vibes, this is the year, most likely, that the Melhama has occurred.